What's that next word, everybody? Buildings are here. So it wasn't the retaining walls around them that would be necessarily all destroyed. It was the buildings. So notice right here, you have this, the temple building, and then these buildings around. And Jesus said this to them. And Jesus answered and said to him, do you see these great buildings? Not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. So what was destroyed? It was the buildings, not the retaining wall around the buildings. Now, by the way, archaeologists were digging, several years ago, digging, and all of a sudden they came and they found these stones right here. Look at that. Not one stone will be left upon another. And here's a picture of me. In fact, our tour guide, one of our tour guides, we had a couple of different tour guides that we're leading at, and I was probably getting on her nerves because I was telling her, we were like 6 days in Jerusalem, and I kept saying, when are we going to see the stones? Not one left upon another. I got to get a picture of this. Got to get a picture of this. And she said, hey, just be patient. We'll get to see the stones. And there they are, right there. I mean, it was so powerful moment to see that because that's what Jesus said. Not one stone will be left upon another, and you can go there and see Bible prophecy fulfilled. The Romans took it over. They were so upset. They drug it over to the side of the Temple Mount, and they threw all these stones, and they shattered. In fact, they found the sidewalk from the time of Christ. It's embedded from these stones hitting it. And I told you at prayer meeting, I just couldn't help myself. I actually kind of broke a piece off of one of those stones. I took it home, and I have it in my house. But and usually I bring it along and say, if you want to touch Bible prophecy, you can. But I don't know which part of the temple it was. I'm going to say it was part of the most holy place. That was my little rock, was part of the most holy place. And I can't prove that, but you can't prove me wrong either. But, the Jews wear black to this day because they're mourning the destruction of the temple. We're going to talk about that now, why it was such a heartache for them. Well, let's go to point number 3. The Temple Mount from 70 A.D. to our day. Well, the Temple Mount lay desolate until 130 A.D. And you remember, during that time, the Romans and the Jews despise each other, and they're at war. Hadrian, the Roman emperor, decides to visit Jerusalem, and he really wants to stick it to the Jewish people. So he sees the Temple Mount, which is desolate and destroyed still. He sees the Temple Mount, and he decides that he is going to put a statue of Jupiter, one of their main gods, and a statue of himself on the Temple Mount. Now, do you think that made the Jews happy, yes or no? Oh, it infuriated them. Those of you who know Jewish history, this triggered the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which caused even more fighting. The Jews were like, we are not going to take that. And yet he did that. So that caused a lot of problems. So then Constantine comes along, and he has this conversion to Christianity, right? And so what happened to the Temple Mount during that time? By the way, here's my best friend while we were over there, and he's acting like he's strong. But there's a great big statue of Constantine. I mean, it's enormous that they still have to this day. So Constantine, he gets converted to Christianity, and he sends his mother, Helena. He said, listen, honey, our mom, or however you want to call her, go and find the sites. Go and find Christ's birthplace. Go and find this place and that place, and let's build churches. So Helena goes off on a pilgrimage. And by the way, that's why we really know fairly well where these places are. Because not only did she find the places, but you can see even before her, she traced the history of how people were going there and worshiping there. So we really have a good idea where Christ was born, where Christ ascended up from heaven on the Temple Mount, where the crucifixion was, etc. But the Christians decided not to build a church on the Temple Mount. They built one at the crucifixion spot in Bethlehem, right across the little valley there on the temple, on the Mount of Olives, where Christ ascended, but they decided against building a church on the Temple Mount. Now, you remember from prayer meeting, why did the Christians decide that? But, and if you were back then and you lived during that time and you were a Christian, if you were on a committee and the committee was deciding whether or not to build a church on the Temple Mount, would you feel uneasy about doing that? And if so, why? Why would you feel uneasy about that? Somebody got it right in prayer meeting, I think. Because remember, what did Jesus say? Not one stone will be left upon another. So if you go and build a church on that, you're kind of going against what he prophesied, right? So Christians decided not to do it. That's exactly what their reason. We have the notes. That's exactly why they did not build it, because they didn't want to go against the prophecy of Jesus, okay? So then In the 7th century, the Muslims take control of Jerusalem. They swept across that area. They take control of Jerusalem, and they began to develop what would be the Dome of the Rock, which you see right now. Now, here's what's fascinating about this. So the general who swept across the area, he wanted to find a place to commemorate his great event. And so he talked with the Christian bishop of the local area, and he asked him, he said, you know what, we want to build a monument here. And the Christian bishop said, you know, right over there, that's where the Jews used to have their temple and used to worship there. And so to get at the Jews, this general conjures up this story that Muhammad visited this place, that, you know, Abraham offered Ishmael there, and that Muhammad had visited this place a number of times, and that Muhammad had ascended to heaven. That is where the story comes in. It didn't exist before that. That is this general who took over, and his buddies, they conjured up this story. Okay, so Muslims took control of Jerusalem in the 7th century. The Muslims wanted to build a special monument for Allah. A Christian pointed out that the Temple Mount was the special place for the Jews. They then made up this whole story about how Muhammad used this place and ascended to heaven there. That is where it comes from. And there is a picture of me at the Dome of the Rock right there. They also have a another mosque right a stone's throw away from there called the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is very sacred to them as well. Now, inside the Dome of the Rock, you know, if you ever talk with Muslims, and many of them are very nice people, but Muslims are very adamant that Jesus is not the Son of God, that he is a prophet. And they just emphasize that. In fact, I was a Bible worker for 3 years, and, you know, knocking on doors and different things like that. And I always just kind of had a policy inside my heart that I was not going to just go by anybody. I was going to talk to anybody that was kind of in my path. I wasn't going to skip a house or skip a person on the sidewalk, regardless of how I felt about that. You know, they might look a little shady. They might look a little scary. I decided I was going to just go up and talk to anybody, because you never know how the grace of God could touch anybody. Well, there was this Muslim guy walking down the sidewalk, and I thought, you should I even bother talking to this guy? You know, it's probably, he doesn't want to talk about this, you know, and I don't want to waste my time. But I kind of had that thought, well, maybe I should talk to him. So anyways, I decided to talk to him. And as soon as he understood what I was canvassing him about, was about, you know, Christianity, he just immediately took over the conversation, and he kept saying, Jesus was a prophet, Jesus was a prophet, Jesus was a prophet, very adamant about that. And so inside the Dome of the Rock in Aramaic, they had this written in large letters, such is Jesus, son of Mary. It is a statement of truth about which they doubt. It is not befitting to the majesty of Allah that he should take himself a child. What is this one saying here? Jesus is not the divine Son of God. He was born of Mary. He's just another man. He is simply a prophet. Okay? All right, let's go on here now. Let me talk about the Jewish people. I'm almost done. But this is called the Wailing Wall. And the Jews go there, and they really, really wail, and they mourn. And sometimes it seems like kind of conjured up. At other times you can see, like on this man's face, that there's a lot of pain there. And the question is, why are they wailing? What is the issue? And I learned this from somebody that Eric and Cassie like to listen to too on YouTube, the Expedition Bible. But here's a picture of me at the Wailing Wall. And I think I shared with you, you know, we actually visited it on Sabbath, on Friday night, as the Jews were welcoming Sabbath. It was a really neat experience. It was also the feast of, what was the feast that they were celebrating? The Feast of Tabernacles, I believe, that they were celebrating that time. So it was kind of like a high Sabbath for them. And they asked us not to take any pictures, but I had to take one. And there's the picture right there that I took. But anyways, what is the big deal? Why are they so upset? Why do the Jews want that place back so bad? Well, here's what I learned. I want you to notice what Leviticus chapter 1, verse 2 says. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when any one of you brings an offering to the Lord, you shall bring your offering of the livestock of the herd and the flock. Now, the Hebrew word there for offering is carbon. And the word there means to get or to come closer. So in other words, here's the idea. You have God over here, you have man over here, and you've got sin that is blocking them from coming together. So how do you come together with God? You bring a carbon, and that removes the sin and brings you and God back together. That is what it does. So here's my little dopey, graphics for you. So you see you got God and sin, and then boom, you bring the carbon. Now God and man are back together. But what the problem with the Jews see is, because they cannot bring the offering there, because they don't have the Temple Mount anymore, that they're far distant from God. So they feel like if they could get the Temple Mount back, if they could reestablish the offerings, they could be back together with God, at one with Him again. And that's why they are very, they're sad and they're wailing. So the Jews are devastated to this day and believe that God will eventually intervene and get it back for them. And the Muslims know this, and that's why there's so much tension, because they know that they want to take that over. Well, the Muslims are equally determined to hold that spot because they feel like it holds religious significance to them. In fact, the Jews are preparing that God is going to get that back to them soon. You can see that they have this in the Jewish quarter. This is not my picture, but I took a picture of it as well. The 7-branch candlestick. They've made all the utensil. They're breeding these red heifers, because you remember the red heifer offering in the Bible, it cleanses things. And so they got all these red heifers. So when God gives it back, they're going to cleanse it from all the Gentile presence, and then they're going to reestablish this. Now, the question, though, is how should New Covenant Christians view these issues? How should you and I? Now, do I feel sorry for the Jewish people if they feel far from God? Yeah, I do. I do feel sorry for them, but I know that those lambs are not, the offerings are not the remedy for that. So as sorry as I feel for them, I don't want them to have that lamb back. You know why? Because I don't want them to start killing innocent lambs, thousands of them again. Why would that be necessary? And so I personally feel that God is blocking them from having that spot back because He does not want those sacrifices to continue again, and that's exactly what they would do. Because all of this stuff you and I know were a copy and shadow of the heavenly things. And so now, instead of looking at those lambs, those types, we are to look to the heavenly sanctuary where the true Lamb of God has been sacrificed on our behalf. And that's now how we come close to God, okay? So my question, I answered it already. Does God want the Jews to start sacrificing thousands of innocent lambs again? Do you think He wants that? No, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Okay, my last point's very quick, and then we're going to separate for the foot washing. So here's where I feel like, Adventism plays a very important role in this. And you don't have to be an Adventist to see this in the Bible, but Adventists have really highlighted this in Christianity. So the importance of Adventism in the true place of sacrifice and mercy. So we believe that Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of all that Old Testament stuff. Okay, all the sacrifices, the priests, etc. And I really like the book of Hebrews, how I believe Paul wrote this. I love how he says this. Now this is the main point of the things we are saying. And when I get to heaven, I'm hoping to have a conversation with Paul. Now, not right away. I'm going to let maybe 100 years pass by, things settle down. But I want to say, Paul, why did you make it so difficult? Do you realize how much I had to clean up after you 2,000 years later, right? But I love when he just kind of puts it like this, so simple. He says, now this is the main point of the things we are saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesties in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle which the Lord erected and not man. That's the whole main point now of the new covenant, that Christ is there ministering on our behalf. In fact, kind of an interesting side story with Adventism. You remember, October 22, 1844, we call that the Great Disappointment. They thought Christ was going to come back on that day. And after the next day, they were just horrified. I mean, what in the world? Where did we go wrong? Embarrassed, horrified, all of that. So Hiram Edson, you know the story, he was walking across his cornfield to go visit some other people who were very sad like him. And he thought what he saw was a vision in heaven, and he saw the heavenly sanctuary and Christ move from the holy place to the most holy place. The story goes, he ran back home and he grabbed his Bible. And he looked at his Bible and he said, Lord, please show me something in your word. Now, I don't advise people to study the Bible like that. And you probably heard the old evangelists say, it's been around in Adventism a long time. When you study the Bible like that, here's what could happen. Lord, please show me something in your word. You open the Bible up and it says, Judas went out and hung himself. Oh, Lord, show me something else. Go thou and do likewise. That's... So you got to be careful with that. So that's not a recommended thing, but in times of desperation, God is very merciful and graceful. And Hiram Edson said, Lord, show me something. He plopped his Bible open, and it was right to that verse right there. There's a heavenly sanctuary. And what's so beautiful about this is, we are Christ's representatives teaching people how they can come close to God through the sacrifice of our high priest in the heavenly sanctuary, the true place of mercy and sacrifice. Now just think about that. 3 a.m. in the morning. You make a mistake, you do something foolish. Where do you go, right? You go to the heavenly sanctuary. You've got a high priest there who's sympathetic. You got a sacrifice there on your behalf, and you can be clean 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Heaven is open to hear a sinner's prayer, and that's what we believe. And I think that's what is very relevant and important about the Adventist message. Okay, well, thank you for listening, everybody. Let's separate now for our communion, or for our foot washing, and then we'll be back in just a